Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nature Connects, the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists and nature experts from New England and around the world. I'm your host, Andrew Benson. The Nature Conservancy and our partners have spent the last 3 years restoring the natural floodplains along the Connecticut River at the Fannie Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. Today, we'll hear from 3 experts who have been on the ground doing this important restoration. They'll talk about the ups and downs of restoration, from planting thousands of trees and managing invasive species to improving water flow and enhancing wildlife habitat. First, we'll hear from Christian Marks. Christian is a floodplain ecologist for the Nature Conservancy. He researches floodplain forests of the Connecticut River to inform and guide their protection and restoration with respect to physical drivers like flow, as well as restoring natural vegetation and controlling invasive species. He's also initiated a project to restore the American elm to its former role as a dominant canopy tree of New England floodplain forests, with the new American elm selections that are more tolerant to Dutch elm disease. We'll then hear from Markelle Smith, Landscape Partnership Manager for TNC in Massachusetts. Markelle manages land conservation projects leveraging funds and facilitates partnerships with our land trust, state, and federal agency colleagues to ensure that the most resilient lands in the state are protected. She also chairs the organization Friends of the Conte National Fish and Wildlife Refuge. Markelle received her Bachelor of Science in Terrestrial Ecology from the University of Vermont and holds a Master of Forestry from the Yale University School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. Dave Sagan is the Wildlife Refuge Specialist at the Silvio O National Fish and Wildlife Refuge. Dave graduated from the University of Massachusetts with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and a minor in Plant, Soil, and Insect Science. Dave has worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for over a decade in roles including Assistant Regional Planner, Park Ranger, and Partners for Fish and Wildlife Biologists. Some of the most rewarding projects he's worked on include dam removals and wetland restorations. And Karen Lombard is the Director of Stewardship and Restoration for TNC in Massachusetts. She oversees preserve stewardship, legal and fee monitoring, and terrestrial restoration projects, which includes invasive species and prescribed fire. Karen received her Bachelor's of Arts in Biology and Environmental Studies from Williams College and her Master of Science in Conservation Biology from the School of Natural Resources and Environment at the University of Michigan. Before I hand it over to Christian, Karen, Markelle, and Dave, just a few quick webinar notes. Our experts will present for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take your questions. As you think of the questions, please share them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical problems during the presentation, just let us know in the chat box, and our incredible team will be able to help you. For the best view of the presentation, we recommend you go to the pull-down menu at the top center of your screen and choose Fit to Window. Thanks again for joining us today, and take it away, Christian.
Welcome, everyone. I just wanted to start us off with a few remarks about why floodplains are special and why we're working in floodplain forests. Floodplains only make up about 1.5% of the world's land surface, yet they provide over a quarter of the ecosystem services. So these are things like flood attenuation, sequestering excess nutrients, providing habitat for fisheries and other species. And the reason that they're so productive, so exceptionally on the ecosystem service, is driven by the physical processes. So in this case, flooding brings in nutrients along with sediments, and that drives a lot of productivity, both microbial and plants, and then that productivity attracts wildlife. Next slide, please. Along with the wildlife, of course, there are threats from people. And so the species that occur there have, in many cases, become quite rare. A number of endangered species are associated with floodplains, like Puritan tiger beetles, or some special plants like green dragon. And there are also species that are still fairly common, but they only occur in floodplain forests. So for example, 1 in 5 of the native tree species in Massachusetts are associated with floodplains and riparian forests. The other thing that's special about that high productivity of floodplain forests is that the trees get very big. I've measured trees over 8 feet in diameter in the floodplain, old silver maples. And some of the tallest cottonwoods are over 140 feet tall, which is very large for Eastern North America. And then bald eagles like to nest in those tall cottonwoods, and cerulean warblers and other species like to forage there, especially during the spring migration. Next slide, please. When you hear the word forest, often we think, well, we've got a lot of forest in New England, and so why floodplain forest? And to put that in perspective, I've created this graphic here where if you imagine that big blue circle as being the area of the Connecticut, then the brown area is about the proportion of that that's forested, over 3/4. But only that tiny little red floodplains, and we see that actually only a very small fraction of those floodplains overlap with the forested area, only about 0.1%, because those rich alluvial soils of floodplains have been mostly cleared for agriculture, and then even more floodplains were lost through the construction of dams and under the impoundments. Next slide, please. So at Fannie Stebbins, we have the opportunity to restore one of the largest floodplain areas. In fact, once those remnants that occur there already are connected by the restored forest, it will be the largest floodplain forest in the watershed and also in the state of Massachusetts, which is really cool. And the other thing that I find special about the particular occurrence in Fannie Stebbins is that it has some rather old trees, some old floodplain forest, where the late successional species that occur in oak growth floodplain forest are common, especially green ash. And before Dutch elm disease, also there would have been large elms associated with that stage. And unfortunately, we now have the emerald ash borer killing a lot of those ash trees. It's the biggest change on the reserve that's ongoing. And to help mitigate that change of those old growth stage, we planted some disease-resistant American elms. So the picture on the right shows an example of this rare forest type with a large elm on the right and some large ashes on the left. Some of you may have attended my earlier talk in this webinar series on American elm restoration. That is now on TNC's YouTube channel if you missed it and are interested. I will hand things off now to Markelle and Karen to talk about the protection and restoration.
Great, thank you so much, Christian. So this is a map of the Fannie Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge, and I'm going to try to orient you a little bit here. So this is the Fannie Stebbins Refuge is a nonprofit organization who owned about 371 acres of land in the Meadows. That's the area that this is kind of fondly nicknamed the Meadows. It's floodplain land with over 2 miles of frontage along the Connecticut River. So the land is just north of the Massachusetts-Connecticut state line that you can see running through there. And it is directly across the river from Six Flags. It's got an Amtrak rail running north-south, and it's also got I-91 that it borders, that touches down on its eastern border. So back in 2012, the Nature Conservancy was approached by the board of the Fannie Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge. They're about a 9-member board because they were trying to figure out a plan for their land in Longmeadow. So this is a suburb of Springfield. because although they were a nonprofit organization, the land wasn't legally protected. So they were concerned about its fate, and because they had no long-term plan for management. Next slide, please. So the Stebbins land had been purchased piece by piece starting in 1951 by members of the Allen Bird Club. This was the oldest bird club in Massachusetts. Fannie Stebbins was one of the original founders of that club. She was also the supervisor of Springfield Elementary School Sciences program, and she was an avid birder herself. A subgroup of the Allen Bird Club formed eventually to manage the 371 acres that they had acquired in Long Meadow, and they called themselves the Fannie Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge. In 1972, the Stebbins Refuge was designated a National Natural Landmark. So in this map, which is fairly complicated, but it sort of shows how things, how we kind of worked on the land protection portion of this project. So as I mentioned, the Stebbins group was concerned that the land wasn't formally protected and they had no plan for ongoing management. And so in early 2012, Christian and I went out and walked the land with two of the Stebbins board members. Christian had already been to this area assessing its value as part of his research on the Connecticut River. So after our visit, we thought about, as we do with land protection, who might be the best owner of this land, owner and steward. And we really ended up sort of agreeing that the Conte National Fish and Wildlife Refuge, which is the only wildlife refuge with the watershed as its boundary, that they would be the best fit to really own and steward this land. So we introduced the Conte Refuge Manager to the Stebbins board. And after that, the Conte Refuge ended up preparing a proposal for the board to consider. Basically, to make a very long story with lots of meetings short, the Stebbins board formally voted to approve that the land go to Conte. So that was really exciting. That happened back in 2013. So after that, we at the Nature Conservancy knew of some funding available through the Massachusetts Natural Resources Conservation Service. And that is actually, so that's under the USDA, which is hence the logo here, but that's another federal entity. And they have funding to restore floodplains. And they want to do that on floodplain land that is also protected. So the funding here is basically available to protect and restore the land. And we thought, wow, this is a great opportunity. Let's not just protect Fannie Stebbins, let's also restore it. So in a very memorable meeting where we had Kate Leary, who was the Stebbins board member that we worked with a lot, who was just such a champion of this project, she stood up and said how important it was to also restore this land. She reminded the Stebbins group of their mission, and they voted unanimously to pursue this funding to restore the land. And so let's see, so about on this map, I just want to point out the green areas here are areas that went directly from the Stebbins Refuge to Conte. So those are formally part of the Conte Refuge. And the red area ended up actually being transferred to the Nature Conservancy. So that's about 244 acres. And that land is encumbered by this wetlands reserve easement. And so that the red area is the area that's restored. And the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, paid Stebbins a portion. They paid them for the easement itself, and then they paid also for the restoration of the land. So it really was a true partnership project. So after we ended up acquiring the fee title to the land, and that happened in March of 2017, we closed on the easement. And then ever since then, since 2017, we've been embarking on this restoration project, which is 3 years long. And there was a very big plan drafted. And I'm going to hand it over to Karen in a minute to talk more about that. But I just wanted to highlight for you the people portion of this project. Next slide, please. So this was a long time in the making. The project itself has been going for about 8 years now. And it really was possible because of people. It's this major partnership. It involved this renowned bird club, 2 federal agencies, the global nonprofit, the Nature Conservancy, and the town of Longmeadow. And it happened all thanks to the members of the Allen Bird Club who had the foresight to acquire this land along the floodplain of the Connecticut River. And they did it piece by piece. And it also happened because we had a lot of inspired partners who were able to look past the many hurdles of this project and see it through to completion. So there were a lot of visionaries involved. And these are just a sampling of the people we worked with. Kate Leary's in the upper corner, and then we also have some members of the Allen Bird Club and the Conte Refuge manager, Andy French. So I really can't say enough about the partners that helped to see this become reality, and it's been a very rewarding project. So to talk more about the restoration portion, I'm going to pass things over to Karen now.
So when I located to Western Massachusetts from Boston in 2016, a team of folks from the Refuge, the Conte Refuge, NRCS, and Fannie Stebbins, and as well as the Nature Conservancy, led by Christian, were just finishing up a restoration plan for this site. And they were looking for someone to manage the restoration project. As restoration is a part of my job, it was a good fit. And I was really excited to take on a project like this in my new backyard. So to set the context for this restoration, I want to just show you these 2 aerial photos, one from 1939 on the left and one from 2009 on the right. One of the first noticeable features is that you can see on the left that there's how much agriculture was at the site in 1939. Also, in 1939, the Amtrak line and Route 91 were not there. We've indicated them on the map by the red dotted line for Amtrak and the solid for Route 91, although Route 5 was. And you also note, if you look down to the southern part of the site, just above that black line and over toward the edge of the river, you can see the parts that were floodplain forest in 1939. And those are still floodplain forests now and are some of the most intact floodplain forests at the site that Christian mentioned with those really large trees. The white box, which is a little bit hard to see, but towards the top of the 1939 slide, look at the difference between that and 1939 and then over on the 2009 slide where it has water in it. There's been some roads going across the site that have impounded the north-south flow, natural water flow of the site. And that was something we wanted to focus on in the restoration. And as Markelle mentioned, I just wanted to note how important this site is, known locally as the Meadows, is to town residents. It's used really heavily at all times of year by wildlife enthusiasts and walkers. And it's got a real wilderness feel to it. Although sometimes you can hear Six Flags and you can hear Route 91, you do feel like you're away from civilization. So this next slide shows the various components of the restoration project. The central piece of it was the restoration of these 7 old hay fields. And that's where we focused on planting nearly 8,000 trees, shrubs, and ferns. And then we also enhanced some of the wildlife habitat by adding some 18 wood duck nest boxes, as well as an osprey nesting platform. And then we did a lot of invasive plant control, both around the edges of the fields and in the intact floodplain forest that you can see as you're off to kind of between the wood duck picture and the fields and back towards the river is the really nice floodplain forest at this site. And then towards the bottom left of the slide, we removed 500 feet of an old roadbed that was blocking north-south flow at the site. So as I got started in 2017, the first thing I had to focus on was permitting. This site has a number of rare species. So we had to get permission from the Natural Heritage Program. We had to find nurseries to grow all those plants, the 8,000 plants. We did rare species surveys, wetlands permitting, and I had to find a contractor to do the actual work on the ground. So as we were getting started, also one of the first tasks was to prepare the fields for planting. We were going to actually put in, live shrubs and trees, but we wanted to also enhance the success of natural seeding in from trees like cottonwoods and red maple as they seed every spring. Many of you that are from the Connecticut River Valley may notice in the spring we've got these cottonwood seeds floating in the air, and they really like this bare soil to germinate. So the inset photo shows you the tree species that are germinating that have now been surrounded by weeds, but they probably germinated on bare soil. We also got started right away on some of the invasive control. There's this right photo shows oriental bittersweet climbing up a floodplain tree, and that's a real threat to these trees. They can pull them down, and so we wanted to control that. So over in 2018 and 2019, we did 2 years of planting. And we had over 20 species, a range of tree species such as, oaks, cottonwoods, a couple kinds of maples, tulip trees, sycamores, a number of different kinds of shrubs, and some ostrich fern. And this was quite an operation and involved quite a lot of labor to do the planting, multiple deliveries from local nurseries that we'd contracted with, as well as some trips on this Marchmaster kind of military-like vehicle to get into parts of the site that were hard to access. We faced a number of weather challenges to start. We had snow that stayed late the first year, which delayed the prepping of the fields. We also had a drought that happened just like this spring, how in May and June we went into like no rain for 6 weeks. That happened in 2018, and that was really challenging for the plantings. We also right away had to deal with extensive deer browse that led us eventually to put up electric fences in many of the fields. So if you visit now, you will see these fences. We also planted 94 disease-resistant elms as part of the project that Christian mentioned early in the presentation. You can see this poor elm in the left picture where it's alive. It's got it was its first year. It's been browsed where the deer could reach, but it's still alive. And then this is what they look like now on the right. They're doing really, really well at the site. So now we're going to go to the field and hear from Dave Sagan, our partner at the Conte Refuge. He's going to talk a little bit about what they've been doing, and we're going to see some video.
Hi, everybody. I think I might actually have one of the best seats in the house as we're going through this webinar today. I'm here live at the Fannie Stebbins division, and it's been amazing to hear about all the restoration and also to kind of see it live while you're talking about it. This floodplain forest is critically important, as Markelle mentioned. Not only is it a national wildlife refuge, but it's also designated through the National Park Service as a national natural landmark. And this area just kind of makes me appreciate it. As we listened to the call today, I saw a green heron fly overhead, a bald eagle. There are some warblers that are just out of sight for me. But I wanted to show you the actual field. I'm right next to one of Christian's elms. And so this is one of the fields that was restored. And if you look off into the distance, you can see a lot more mature trees starting to pop up through the shrubbery and vegetational growth. It's a beautiful day out here today, and there's all sorts of birds singing. I saw some spotted turtles earlier on. And so I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about where we currently are as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and one of the land managers. So can we go to that slide that has the photo on it, please?
It's up now, Dave.
I don't know. All right, thank you. I don't know how great my service is right here, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was some of the improvements that we've been able to work with here. So we currently have installed a new viewing platform that the public has been able to view wildlife that goes out along a roadside. It's extraordinarily popular. There's thousands of visitors that come down to this unit every year. It's an amazing intact floodplain forest, and it's just minutes outside of the third largest city in the state of Massachusetts. And so currently there was a half a dozen people that have walked by me on the trails today and out here enjoying the beautiful day. And also, one of the things we've done is we've actually made some improvements to the trail system where we've continued to maintain them, but we've also created a source to sea campsite. So as part of that campsite, paddlers that go along the whole 410-mile river, Connecticut River, from the Long Island Sound all the way up to the first lake, which also and vice versa. Most people travel south. There's over 50 campsites that are along the way. There's also, it's a link of portages.
Looks like we
Can anyone hear me?
Oh, Dave, yes, we can hear you. You're back.
Maybe Dave, go off
Am I
video.
back?
Yeah, just go off video, Dave. See if that works for reception while we're seeing the slides.
All right. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
I hope you can hear me now. So some of the slides, sorry, I was working without video before. Now I can actually see the slides. So the upper left-hand corner is actually one of the views that you can see off of that viewing platform that was built along Pondside. And the viewing platform is in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide. And so those are one of the trails that we've really made improvements to that people love fishing off of, or just seeing all the great blue herons or great egrets and all the beautiful open water that's there. On the bottom left-hand side is the primitive campsite along the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, one of 50 paddler trails along the main stem of the Connecticut. It's amazing to see people come in and paddle either for a night, or even it's the ones that are doing the entire river. But there's a primitive privy there and 2 tent platforms for people to enjoy and spend a night or two and then continue further south on the river. What you're also seeing in the center of that slide is actually the installation of the fence. So not only as a land manager are we responsible for the recreational access for this land, but we're also responsible for the upkeep and management of this restoration that so many people have worked hard to restore. So one of the things we saw was that there was increased deer browse, and we were able to actually work to eliminate deer in the field by putting up this electric fencing, but it actually takes continued maintenance. So we will monitor these fields for invasive species coming back in and treat those and remove them, but we will also maintain the fence line until the tree are large enough to be able to be out of the deer browse and be able to survive. So my next slide, I kind of talk about the future. Can we go to the next slide, please?
We can see it now. If it might be a lag for you.
Okay. So the next slide, I believe it was talking about what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Conte will do into the future. I think I'm back, if you can hear me.
I can hear you, yes.
All right, sorry for the breaking up of the signal. So one of the things of the Conte Refuge, we manage for wildlife and people. So we will continue to help restore this area, but we also create access. So the vision for the Conte Refuge is actually to help create a ADA accessible trail down here. So we're right along the main stem of the Connecticut River. Folks can have a beautiful view looking across to Six Flags, or they can go through the complex of wetlands that makes up this area. And our goal is to be able to have a trail that folks will be able to enjoy, fully accessible, whether it's wheelchair or walker. And that's pretty cool. I wish I could show you my screen right now because I just had 2 wood ducks come and land right in front of me. So the future will be hopefully continuing to keep this area open, maintained, and accessible for everybody. And then my next slide.
It's up, Dave, and now we can see you if you want to go vertical.
Can you see me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I hope you can see me now.
Yep.
So I'm back in the field. I'm actually at one of the wetland complexes. And just to give appreciation of this beautiful view, we have an amazing complex of wetlands that are either open or fully wooded that make up this area. There's a mallard that's actually right out in front of me. I'm not sure if the camera is facing me or you.
It's facing you. We see you.
Oh, sorry. Well, you guys are missing out. Let's see if I'm back facing there now. So this is this amazing complex, and you'll see a mallard sitting right in front of us that just pitched in after those wood ducks. And I think that's a good way of bringing it home and saying conservation is important. And I think we are truly, all the folks that showed this partnership being an amazing partnership to be able to conserve this area. This wouldn't have been done by just the Fish and Wildlife Service, just Nature Conservancy. It took a whole suite of species. The Allen Bird Club to have the vision to be able to protect this area for future generations, the town of Longmeadow to also help us work and protect further lands here, and the Nature Conservancy, of course, who really spearheaded and led this whole effort. So with that, I just wanted to wrap up, say thank you. I hope you guys got to see a little bit of what I got to see today. It was a little iffy on the signal, but I hope you enjoy and have a beautiful afternoon.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, for the nice view out at Fannie Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge. I know what you said in the beginning is true, that you have the best seat in the house. And you know what? I'm feeling a little bit jealous. So yeah. And again, thank you so much for showing us the mallard ducks, and that conservation is really, truly important. And we can find lands close to our homes. I know I learned a lot. So thank you so much to everyone for that look into the restoration at Fannie Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge. Just a reminder, as you think of questions, please share them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we'll start with a question for Karen. Karen, how did we achieve success in partnership with the city and resident groups?
Yes, thanks. Fortunately, we were really able to build on the relationships that the Fannie Stebbins board, which is now an entity called the Friends of Stebbins under the Friends of Conte group that Markelle leads. But they had, they were from the area and they had a lot of relationships with other people. So we were able to use those relationships to move forward. And during the project, we and the Friends had events to show people what we were doing. And we also gave a really well-attended presentation at the library as the project was beginning. We hope that, that we can build on this going forward and get a lot more public engagement in the future. It's going to be a really wonderful outdoor classroom for kids in the neighboring communities that are in urban situations. And I don't know if Markelle, if you have anything to add about that.
Yeah, I mean, so really the partnership started way back when in 2012, and we just kept adding partners as we did the protection and then the restoration. And now actually the exciting thing is there's the Fannie Stebbins group is now the Friends of Stebbins. So they are a friends group, and they're part of the Friends of Conte, which is a group that the Nature Conservancy has been involved with for a long time. And I currently chair that group. It's an umbrella group and of a lot of friends organizations all through the Connecticut River watershed. And so the partnership remains. We realize this restoration is not just a one-off, that it's going to require maintenance over time. So we will continue to work with the Friends of Stebbins and the town down here, and also probably add more partners like the Springfield Science Museum. And because this is really an outdoor classroom now, which is exciting.
That certainly is exciting. And Markelle, while I've got you here, so much of this work has been possible because of our partners. Can you talk about how partnerships have been essential?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's nice is, you can protect or you can restore the land, but unless it's protected, it can always be paved over. And so I guess I feel like I'm really grateful to NRCS for having this funding that we were able to tap into that really protected and restored the land. And I'm really grateful to the folks at Conte, the refuge. Their vision for this has made it a reality. And now they're doing so much work down there, improvements, and they're just a great partner with the town. So I can't say enough for how satisfying the project has been, thanks to all the partners involved.
Thank you so much. And Christian, so one of the biggest accomplishments of Stebbins has been the restoration of American elms. Can you talk about why this has been so important?
As I alluded to earlier, elms are ecologically the most similar to green ash, and those two species combine some unique traits. They are able to withstand flooding as well as grow in the shade of other trees. So the other floodplain trees, they're pretty good at coming in an old field like the restoration areas or on a sandbar, but then they can't have seedlings coming in underneath the canopy. And so to keep the forest going, those trees that are flood tolerant are really important. And we're losing both of those species between Dutch elm disease and emerald ash borer. And having the opportunity with disease-resistant trees can help mitigate that impact that, green ash had been doing when it was just Dutch elm disease. And hopefully, decades from now, we'll also be able to develop emerald ash borer resistant ash. There are a lot of big ash trees at Stebbins, and many of them are sick and dying now from the emerald ash borer, but some of them survive and will have resistance, so we might be able to find some at Stebbins. Whereas in a lot of other places, there would be salvage logging and people cut down these trees while they can still worth some money. So it's another thing that Stebbins can help contribute for the future of floodplain forests.
Thank you so much. So we have a question from our audience. Other than Oriental bittersweet, what invasive species were you managing and how did you tackle them? This is a question. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Fannie Stebbins has quite a few invasive species, but particularly shrubs. We've got honeysuckle, the burning bush. We've got there's garlic mustard. There's stilt grass. Just pretty much everything we've got in Massachusetts has made its way to Stebbins because there's so much disturbance at the site. But fortunately, in part of the area where we're controlling it, there's a lot of intact, like native trees, like Kristen was describing, and native shrubs as well. So by taking these out, we're really enhancing what is remaining there.
Thank you so much, Karen. And the next question is for Dave. What's next for Stebbins and how will we manage it into the future? Dave, I think you're on mute here. We see you though. Constant Zoom struggles here.
All right, how about that?
That sounds great.
So I've now moved into the floodplain forest. So give you all a different view kind of what some of the habitat looks like down here. And so the question about into the future, I think I kind of alluded to a little bit before. We're land stewards for the next generation. So we're going to make sure that we get people passionate about this area, about conservation, and we're going to continue to maintain this area to work with invasive species, to work with the local community to improve it, and then also maybe to improve access for folks to get down here from the city of Springfield, from the Springfield Science Museum, and from Longmeadow and the surrounding schools even. It's a beautiful area and we really need people to be passionate and care about it.
Certainly, certainly. Thank you so much. And the next question is around public access. What percentage of the Stebbins Sanctuary is accessible to visitors? And this question can be for anyone who wants to answer it.
I think I can talk on that one just as I was talking about trails. The floodplain forest is really accessible. I mean, the nice part about this area is very flat. Depending on the time of the season, it can be very mucky and hard to get through. So if like this time of the year in the summer, all the trails are nice and wide open and accessible and people are walking and riding their bikes down it. But depending if you come in the wintertime, a lot of those areas freeze over and you can walk just about anywhere in the floodplain. And then early in the springtime is probably when our peak visitation is for visitors, when we have most folks coming down here because we also have our peak visitation for our migratory birds that stay and move through this area. And so on that area, there's many designated trails that people can walk along that stay nice and dry. But as you get closer and closer to the Connecticut River, which is the border of the property, obviously it gets further and further, lower and lower in the floodplain, and you actually will get wetter. So depending on the time of the year is your accessibility.
Thank you so much, Dave. And just a reminder, as you think of questions, please submit them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And, we'll just continue on with the questions we're seeing come in this point. Karen, of all the conservation work you oversee, why has the restoration work of Stebbins been so impactful?
This project is one of several floodplain forest restoration projects that's occurring along the Connecticut River, and Christian has been an advisor on most of them. And so I think it's been really important. We're learning a lot about how to do these kinds of projects. In fact, a group of us got together and sort of debriefed last winter on everything we've learned. And so I think it's also just raised the awareness of the importance of these habitats and how important it can be to restore land right in urban areas where people are and where they can get out and see what we're doing.
Awesome, thanks. And one more question for you, Karen, while I've got you here. How can we support your work and what can people at home do?
Well, I think, relevant to this project, I think it would be great for folks to learn more about floodplain forests near where they live and try to visit them if you can. Sometimes it can be challenging if there aren't trails. While summer is lovely, if there's no trail, you'll have a lot of things like nettles and mosquitoes and poison ivy. But my favorite time to visit them, even though it can be flooded, is spring. Or potentially, if you like to kayak, you could look for floodplain forests along the edges of the rivers that you're kayaking or canoeing. So I would also encourage you, in terms of just enhancing habitats in general, to, encourage you to plant native species in your own yard for birds and pollinators that, fly between many places as part of their life cycles. So I encourage you that. And fortunately, there's a lot of resources out there now for folks to take advantage of to learn how to do that in their own yards.
Thank you so much, Karen. Another question from our audience for just about anyone here. How prevalent and or important are oaks in this habitat?
Maybe I'll answer that one. So there are two oak species that have flood tolerance, swamp white oak and pin oak, Quercus palustris and Quercus bicolor. And they both reach their northern range limit in Massachusetts. But also the swamp white oak. And interestingly, in the trees that we planted, the swamp white oak did really well. So I think we'll see lots of swamp white oaks on the property, and they'll provide mast for wildlife. They're late successional species like the ash and elm. As you get further from the river, the swampy areas will tend to have oaks in them, and they attract woodpeckers that eat the acorns in some years. And yeah, they definitely have a lot of value, those oaks. And we try to have a high diversity of species in what we're planting, especially the ones that don't disperse as easily. So like cottonwood, the seed flies everywhere, the way Karen was explaining, and will recruit naturally in those little fields, but those acorns don't move as easily, so that we focused on those kinds of species in our planting.
Thank you so much, Christian. So we have another question from our audience here. Can you talk a little bit more about the 500 feet of road bed that you removed and any changes in hydrology that resulted?
Right, so actually the roadbed was an old road called Meadow Road that was cut off when Route 91 was built. And part of the road was under these wetlands that run north-south, these swale wetlands. And then part of it, you'd come up out of the wetland and you'd cross a little upland piece and there would be pavement. So you could see these remnants of road. So we finished that part of the project up late last fall. It was pretty messy after the heavy equipment had been in there. But right away, particularly the first wetland, and Dave, I don't know if you showed a little brief glimpse of it, it got pretty deep. In fact, the contractors told us, really don't try to walk. Previously, we could walk across the wetland, sometimes in rubber boots, or it would go a little higher, but it really did improve the flow in that particular wetland, and presumably the ones after that, because they got much deeper with the work.
Karen, I think I remember being out there with you at one point, hiking through those wetlands and not having waders with me, so having to fashion some bags over my boots there before.
Yeah, I've got a
coming
picture
through.
documenting that, Andrew, in case I ever need it.
Hopefully there might be a day you need it, but hopefully we can keep that one away from the webinars from here on out. But I think that brings up something important about Stebbins, in that its location is just south of Springfield, and it's really just public access for the community to enjoy a restored floodplain. Can we talk about some of the benefits of having that resource there in Western Mass?
Yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead, Dave.
Okay. I think it's an amazing resource. So the Silvio Conte Refuge being located in 4 different states and 22 different locations, this is one of our gems. This truly is a beautiful area along the Connecticut River, and it's so accessible. I mean, we can have school groups down here. We have a visitor service manager that takes groups out. She brings them to the viewing platform. Kids get to see wildlife up close. They get their hands on a frog or a turtle. I mean, truly, I think it's inspirational. Sometimes it's life-changing for them. And, also with that campsite so close, we can lead groups that'll be able to come down, spend a night. Imagine spending a night just outside of Springfield, someone that's never camped before. And they have a place that's now in their backyard, and it's just unique and special. And I think that goes a long way. And for the Conte Refuge, this is a very special unit for us.
Especially in the times we are in right now, where people are clamoring to find ways to get outside and find something to do to just get away from areas like we're in right now. Well, except for you. I mean, we're all in front of a computer screen inside. You're outside. You're doing it. But I think it's especially important, even in the pandemic right now, to have these type of areas. And moving forward, let's talk about maintenance and some of the agencies that will be kind of taking the lead and working on maintaining Stebbins. Can we have a quick shout out of those agencies and organizations?
Sure. So Fish and Wildlife Service is one, and then also the USDA will be part of it forever because they continuously own that easement over the top of it. But TNC will always be helping here to engage and help further the mission of conservation. But really, the Friends of Stebbins, which are critical, they're now that nonprofit group that help us support this beautiful area and make people passionate and care about it. There's so many folks that it's hard to just say. The town of Longmeadow owns land down here. It's a very hodgepodge of ownership between the town of Longmeadow, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy. So it's just all these agencies and all these public nonprofits coming together, working on the same common goal to preserve this beautiful gem and landmark along the Connecticut River.
Conte really is a picture and a story of partnerships and how all these organizations can come together to protect something so great for the community. We have another question here from a viewer who asking about fish populations. Did fish populations increase as a result of the restoration? And this question can be to anyone who feels they can answer it.
That was not something that we were monitoring as part of this. This was wetlands, so I'm not really sure. But I think anything that enhances wetland habitat is good for the fish and other wildlife that use the area.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I think we have one more wildlife question. This one might be for the birders out there. Do ospreys use the platform, and are there bald eagles nests there, or have we seen them at some point?
So this is Dave, and so the osprey platform did not get occupied this year, but the exciting part was we did have a photographer that was out throughout the springtime, and there was actually documented ospreys coming and carrying sticks to the nest, which was exciting. And then we're talking about the bald eagle. I mean, really and truly, during this conference, I had a beautiful bald eagle fly just over the tops of the trees across the field towards the river. So the birding here is amazing. It's really an amazing area during the migration as a stopover, or for wood ducks to continue to stay here and nest. The birding, if you can come out during the spring, is absolutely beautiful here.
I believe there's a Facebook group of photographers. This is a big hotspot for photographers, and I think there's a Facebook group that puts up a lot of photography if anyone's interested.
Yes, yeah, it definitely is a hotspot for birders. And I remember going out there for a bird blitz a couple years ago and just being able to enjoy the incredible community of birds that are out there. One more wildlife question here about Stebbins. What changes in plant or animal communities do we expect to come with climate change? And again, this one can be directed to anyone here. I mean, I think there's some incredible resources also about movement of wildlife available at nature.org/Massachusetts with Biomap 2, but specifically with Stebbins, are we anticipating any kind of changes or new species moving in?
So I can talk about plants. So I mentioned that the floodplain oaks are near the northern range limit, so we could expect them to become more abundant. But there are also a couple of species that are really rare in southern New England now because they're at their northern range limit, swamp cottonwood and sweet gum. And I think we'll see those making their way into natural floodplain forest, especially sweet gum gets planted a lot as a street tree. So the seed source is already here. So I would think they will make an appearance there in the coming decades.
Thank you so much. And we've got another question from the audience. And just as a reminder, if you have questions, go ahead and submit them to the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. We've got a few minutes left, so we'll get to a couple more. So it's kind of the last call for questions in the Q&A section. So since 2017, have we had a major flooding event, and has anything surprised you from these experiences?
I don't think, I mean, there is annual flooding there, and some years that's higher than others, but I wouldn't say that we've seen anything unusual in terms of flooding. We did have that drought I mentioned that at the start of the planting that was really challenging. Surprisingly, although we're in a floodplain, parts of it dry out really fast. The soils are very silty and fine, and just a day or two after the rain, it felt like it hadn't even gotten wet in some cases, and maybe Christian can say more about that. But there wasn't anything particularly unusual other than that.
And also, yeah, thank you so much. And another question here from the audience, can the refuge be expanded?
Hi, so this is Dave again. So yes, the refuge can be expanded. There is a plan in place that approves areas within the Fish and Wildlife, within the Connecticut River watershed, where we're allowed to purchase land. I don't know I forget what the total is that we're allowed to purchase, but it's all separated out in further divisions and units. And so if you ever go to Silvio Conte National Wildlife Refuge, if you Google that, go to our website, there's a great plan in place that you can see called our Comprehensive Conservation Plan. And that lays out the vision for the Conte Refuge over the next 15 years of where we possibly could buy land from willing landowners. But that also is dependent on what funding is available that's allocated from the government and who's willing to sell lands to the federal government.
And Andrew, I can just step in and add, yeah, I should have said this before, but it's pretty exciting that, when the Nature Conservancy partners with the Conte Refuge, which we do in other places, not just Stebbins, but Stebbins has been a big one, but we do it around the watershed in some of these conservation focus areas of the Conte Refuge, and we're adding acreage to divisions like this. But it's really our goal to make sure that the land is managed by one entity. So because of that, the Nature Conservancy we're going to be transferring the land that's been restored. So on the map I showed, the red area will all become part of the Fannie Stebbins unit of the Conte Refuge. So that's the step that hasn't yet happened, but it's going to happen soon because the restoration is now done. So the Conte Refuge will be able to manage this full 371 acre unit. So that's kind of, that's exciting. That's the next step.
That is certainly very, very exciting. And this restoration has spanned years and many partners. So I'm sure we're all excited that that's taking place. Another question here, where can people go to learn a little bit more about the restoration or about the Friends of Conte?
So from the Conte National Wildlife Refuge in general, we have a great website that you can visit that also links to our Friends group. We also have a group of nonprofits called the Friends of Conte that help do guide and work for conservation within the watershed. The Nature Conservancy is one of the very critical partners inside that partnership. And so I would recommend the first guide is to go to the Silvio O National Wildlife Refuge website.
Yeah, and the Friends of Conte also has a web page, and you can link to the Friends of Stebbins that way as well. We have contact information for the Friends of Stebbins if you're interested in Stebbins in particular. And also there are friends groups for a lot of the Conte refuge areas around the whole watershed. So if you have one in your backyard that you're interested in, I would encourage you to reach out to a friends group.
Awesome, thank you so much. And you know, we're close to time here, but are there any final thoughts from our panelists? Anything that you wish we had asked or touched on that we didn't? All right, well, thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for your support of the Nature Conservancy. That's what makes this work possible. You can connect with us on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram, as well as on our website, nature.org/Massachusetts. Join us next week. We'll have 2 webinars, one on Tuesday, June 21st. We'll hear from Coastal Program Manager for TNC in Massachusetts, Steve Kirk, in a special conversation with filmmaker and New England Marine Program Director, Sally McGee, to talk about a new film that illustrates the impacts of climate change on shellfish growers. Then on Thursday, June 23rd, we'll hear from Andrew Tingley, Director of Communications for NatureVest, to learn how TNC is safeguarding biodiversity in the face of climate change by protecting 253,000 acres of Central Appalachian forest, and how upfront philanthropy is unlocking debt relief for island nations and unlocking $1.6 billion for ocean conservation. You can find the full webinar schedule and past recordings at nature.org/MA-webinars. And we'll be sending along a thank you email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. If you're enjoying these webinars, please do tell a friend about them. Thank you all so much and hope you have a great evening.